I never imagined seeing such a sight, my father, pale and lifeless, lying in a coma, as a pack doctor with extraordinary self-healing abilities. He had never been sick. What could have possibly done this to him? Chapter 20. Your father is in a coma. Skylar. I could only stare in alphabet in dismay, refusing to believe the words coming out of his mouth. My father, pale and motionless in a cot in the infirmary, was something I had never expected to see. Pack doctors, having an affinity unlike normal werewolves, had a superior self-healing ability than anyone but an alpha. My father had never been sick, not that werewolves were prone to sickness after childhood. Anyways, he had never had any sort of medical condition. When I thought of the epitome of health, my father came to mind. Yet here he was, nearly lifeless in the cot right in front of me. Alpha Brett had pulled out a chair for me and I sank into it slowly. I gingerly reached out and rested my hand on my father's arm, almost wincing from the lack of heat emanating from his skin. How? I asked softly. The last it heard. My father had been treating Maria after she had been attacked. When Alpha Brett ordered me to come to the infirmary immediately because something happened to my father, it was as if the ground was collapsing under my feet. Could anything else go wrong? Maria was barely coherent as Alexander while she was still weak. She said the vampires took some of his blood and injected him with a substance. Whatever it was, there must be some silver infused, because his wolf isn't healing him. He indicated my father's upturned arm. The veins were dark and stood out against his pale skin. It was poison pumping through my father's veins. There obviously wasn't that much silver because it didn't kill him. Your father's affinity is strong. He would have a better chance of recuperating than anyone else in the pack if he hadn't been drained from helping Maria. The alpha stone was flat and clipped. I could sense the tension simmering underneath his tone. And I knew why Anne was missing too. It had taken a while to notice the blonde's absence, as Maria had not been coherent enough to talk. It was several hours after Marius' arrival to the infirmary, but sometime before my father was attacked, that the pack was notified that an scent was stale. She was known to wander off on her own sometimes, but when her father could not break her mental barricade to contact her, he knew something was wrong. Now the whole pack was in a near panic state. 2 werewolves injured, one of which currently in a coma and the alpha's daughter missing. I barely noticed when Alpha Brett strode off, presumably to renew his search for his daughter, leaving me and my mother alone with the prone figure in front of us. My mother's brilliant blue eyes were red, rimmed, her curls in disarray. She was crying softly and refusing to look at anything in particular. I couldn't blame her, it was her mate. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. The thought of my own mate caused a lump to rise in my throat, and I quickly brushed the image of Gabriel's face out of my mind. My own flesh and blood was suffering in front of me, and that had to take priority. I dimly registered the sound of the door opening and closing, followed by shuffling footsteps. I spun around to see a haggard Maria limping. She still looked tired and strained from her contact with silver, in fact. I was surprised she was moving at all. She slowly walked over to the bed nearest my father's and eased herself in. I just needed some fresh air, she said quietly. Dark eyes dull. Skylar. So, don't Maria. It's not your fault. I waited outside while my father was treating you, but Alpha Brett told me to go home, to get some sleep until you were awake. I shouldn't have listened. Maybe I would have been able to stop them. She shook her head quickly. You wouldn't have been able to. Those vampires were in and out in half a minute. Maybe less. They barely even woke me up and I couldn't smell them. I'd never seen anyone move that fast. A flicker of fear crossed her expression. I gritted my teeth. What happened? To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I was sure she had told the story already to hear it. I needed to hear it. The brunette sighed, lowering herself into a horizontal position on the cot. After you and Will argued, I confronted him. He said some upsetting things. I went to the forest, and followed me. We were talking, and all of a sudden he was there. He was vampire. Tall, lighter brown hair, creepy blue, green eyes. He seemed really strong, and really evil. I didn't even catch his scent. He just snuck up on us. I nodded for her to go on. He wrapped us in silver before we could move, and gagged us, so we cowed and called for help. We were no match for him. He knew my name, and he knew who Anne was, which means he must have been watching everyone for a while. He said something about not wanting Anne to be there, but said she would be collateral damage. Just like me. He knocked me out and took Anne. A palpable sense of guilt appeared in Maria's dark eyes. There was nothing he could have done. That was Cain, it had to be. No other vampire would be able to take on to full, grown werewolves at once that quickly. I couldn't imagine going face with the monster like Maria had. The thought made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. She visibly shuddered. He just radiated evil. Skylar. I can't explain it any better than that. He is the oldest vampire. He would be too strong for anyone except an alpha. Too strong for anyone except Gabriel. I added inside head. I don't remember much of being brought back here. When I woke up from one of my dozes, there was different vampire leaning over me. He smothered me so I cowled and cried out while the other one, Cain or whatever his name is, began to inject Maria, indicated my father with a jerk of her head, seemingly unable to say more. But I understood. My mother had remained silent through all of this, but I could see the lines of visible tension in her delicate shoulders. She sniffed, loudly, taking one of my father's hands in hers. It was heartbreaking to watch. Alpha Brett said they took his blood. I was stating it more than asking, but I had to know. What the hell would Cain want with my father's blood? The thought deeply perturbed me. Maria nodded mutely, and he said you, an unworkable lateral damage. Not the intended target. My brain was quickly working to put the pieces together. He also attacked when my father was at his weakest. Everything came together with horrifying clarity, and I swallowed hard. So he wanted my father's blood all along. That was what he was going for. All of his other actions with you and Anne were leading to this. So why does he still have Anne? She asked weakly. I did not want to find out. I stayed by my father's beside as the sunlight began to creep across the sky, night turning into early morning, then morning transitioning into a bright and hot afternoon. After a few hours, Maria left the infirmary to return home. After she left, I lowered my head and let the guilt wash over me. This is all my fault. I thought morosely, resting my elbows on the bed nearest my father. He hadn't moved in all the hours since he'd been here. My mother had fallen into a restless sleep, her hand still placed in his. You couldn't have known ego after your family. My wolf tried to reason, but she too seemed subdued. Yes, I could have. He likes to play games. I should have known that anyone close to me would be a direct target. He could have just wanted packed up to blood regardless of the relation to you. Then why attack my best friend? He could have attacked anyone in the pack to get my father's attention. She couldn't argue with that logic. I stared down at my father's face, peaceful in sleep despite the situation. Why did Cain want his blood? I had no doubt it had something to do with my father's affinity. Attacking Maria just seemed like Cain's way of getting at me. He could have killed her, but instead he left her on the fringes of death for my father to heal her. It seemed like he was toying with me, letting me know what power he had over all of us. I felt a flutter of panic as I took in my father's stillness, and for the millionth time I wished I had inherited his affinity. The pack did not have another doctor to take his place. We would be lost until another was born with the affinity. I was worse than useless, and I was sure everyone was thinking the same thing. There was a she-wolf in the pack, Linda, who worked part-time in the human settlement at a medical clinic to earn money for her family. She could not treat my father as a werewolf. His makeup was completely different than a human's, but she came in every so often to check his vitals. I caught a waft of her scent as she entered the room, tools in hand. I was grateful to her for trying, even though she couldn't really help him. I had been feeling feverish the last couple of hours. My skin was prickling, and I felt jumpy. No doubt it was due to all of the stress. But regardless, I needed some fresh air. "I'll be right back," I muttered to Linda, quickly exiting the infirmary knowing my father was in good hands. The gentle breeze and warm air outside were refreshing, but I still felt. I took deep breaths as I attempted to calm myself down and think about what to do. What was wrong with me? Was I coming down with something? Trying to ignore the itching under my skin. I thought about what to do. There were scant options. I could not help my father, in fact. The nearest source of help was in Gabriel's pack Ava. I stiffened as the idea came to me. What if we sent for help to the Black Mountains pack? Would Gabriel allow Ava to cross our borders? Would he do something like that for me? Helping the enemy pack? I felt a flicker of doubt as I remembered Alpha Brett's blatant hatred for them. But surely he would listen to reason when it came down to someone as important as my father. I glanced around, noting the absence of wolves in the pack village. They must all be looking for Anne. The blonde and I had never gotten along, but still I felt the guilt rise again. It was my fault she was missing. I could have argued more and told Alpha Brett that Cain liked to taunt me and play mind games, that he might go after someone close to me. I was selfish to keep my mouth shut. I reached out a mental probe, finding Alpha Brett's presence. Alpha Brett. Almost more owlsy as I thought of what his reaction might be to my previously unheard of proposition. "What? Skylar? I'm a bit busy right now." His tone was quite unwelcoming. "I just had an idea about how we could help my father. I know you don't like the Black Mountains pack, but Gabriel might be willing to help since it's my... We're not asking for help from them." Alpha Brett's voice rung with dislike and left little room for argument. "But they could send over their pack doctor and she could help. They have made no effort before to be peaceful with us. We do not need our enemies here in a time like this." "Yeah, but Gabriel has a mate here now. It's different." I sensed Alpha Brett snarl over the mind link. "Absolutely not. And don't think I'd forgotten that we need to have a serious talk. Skylar, with that..." He abruptly cut me out, gritting my teeth as the anger rose. I quickly strode back into the infirmary. What was his problem? Was he too blinded by his own hatred to ask for help in a serious time of need? I sat down roughly in the chair next to my father as Linda exited. Ignoring my mother's confused stare, I reached forward and determinedly grabbed my father's hand, mentally reassuring him that it would all be okay. To my surprise, when I grabbed his hand, I felt an odd sensation. It was like a brief moment of searing heat, jolting from his hand and shooting up my arm. It left the hairs on my forearm standing straight up, and I released my father's hand in confusion. My arm was tingling as the sensation faded. What was going on? Was that a good sign? I tentatively grabbed his hand again, but the blazing sensation of heat did not reoccur, and I was left staring at his sleeping face, preoccupied. A couple hours later, and still had yet to be found, and there was no change with my father. My mother made me jolt in surprise when she spoke for the first time in a long while. "Skylar, do you think would you mind leaving me alone with your father for a while? I'd just like to talk to him. I don't know. Maybe hearing my voice will help wake him up." Her eyes were glassy with unshed tears. Her beautiful face nearly crumpled in despair. I couldn't say no to her when she looked like that, so I reluctantly agreed. Perhaps I could rest for a while at home. After Will and I argued, I had returned home and taken a shower, trying to wash away my anger, but had never been able to sleep because Maria was attacked so soon after dark. I reluctantly released my father's hand and, with one last glance at my mother's morose expression, exited the infirmary and navigated the narrow alleyways between houses to return to my own. Upon walking in, the air seemed stale, the house tense and quiet. I frowned as I entered the living room. Nobody had been here since late last night when we'd received news of my father. Yet something was off. My wolf waned in the back of my mind. I tensed up, trusting my instincts, as they'd never led me astray before. I glanced around warily, my eyes roving the furniture and the pictures on the walls. Nothing had been touched, so why did I feel as if another presence had been here? My trepidation increasing, I slowly took the stairs up towards my room. My preoccupation was heightened as I approached the sleeping quarters. I couldn't quite explain it. It was as if the air had been stirred by a body other than my own. As the hair on the back of my neck began to prickle, I knew I was correct. I had learned to recognize this feeling as I always got it when vampires had been around. My wolf had a keen sense for other supernatural creatures. Recognizing it made my blood cold, and I slowly pushed open the door to my bedroom. The wooden door creaked ominously as my room's contents were revealed. My eyes immediately found the culprit, a small white slip of paper, innocently resting in the exact center of my bed. My bed was immaculately made, sheets tucked in and pillows fluffed. But there was one problem. I hadn't made the bed. Goosebumps sprung up and down my arms, and I tried not to shiver. It was the middle of the day, and I knew the vampire's cowl didn't reach me here. But the thought of Cain making my bed disturbed me on a deep level. I hesitantly approached the bed, remembering the last time he had left me a gift. I could only hope he hadn't put one of Anna's body parts in a container and sent it to me, to my small sense of relief. The piece of paper was the only new addition to my room. I swallowed hard and braced myself as I gingerly picked it up. Half of the page was covered in a flowing script that I recognized as Cain's. Assuming Cain had written the note to me in Gabriel's home when Riley's heart was left in the box on my bed. Skylar, you really need to straighten your room. Although I imagine you've been busy. What with taking care of your father and all. Sorry about that. But I needed his blood. Call it scientific curiosity. I believe I have something or someone your pack wants. I know they're looking for me, but I'm rather hard to track, as you know, and they'll have no luck finding the Alpha's daughter. I am, however, available to talk to you. Consider the blonde my bargaining chip. Walk north into the woods immediately after sundown, and keep walking. I'll find you. Come alone. I'd hate to see what would happen to this scared little she-wolf if you don't come, or if you try to lead someone else to me. They'll be waiting. Never had a day felt so long. I hadn't even debated ignoring the note. At this point, I had seen enough of Cain's ruthlessness to know he would kill Anne in a heartbeat and leave her there for us to find. It would be all my fault. If it were anyone else besides Cain, I might think they were bluffing. But I knew it would be just as easy for Cain to kill off the pack members one by one until I gave in. I was going to let any more blood be spilled if I could help it. It didn't matter that Anne and I had never gotten along. She was my pack member, and she had a mate out there waiting to meet her one day. She had a father, a mother, and a little brother that loved her. It was her time to die. With my rosary to protect me, I would have to trust Razier less words that the vampire's cowl didn't touch me. I knew that I was putting myself in danger, and that Gabriel wouldn't like it. But Riley was dead. Maria had almost died, and my father was in a coma. I couldn't take much more. I needed to know what the hell Cain wanted from me, and I was going to put my entire pack's safety at risk because of cowardice. Perhaps I was being reckless, but I didn't care. I was out of options. So I acted like nothing was on my mind besides my father's health to fool my mother, sitting by his bedside and staring into space as darkness slowly arrived. The rest of the pack was in such a state of panic because of Anna's disappearance that I knew they'd scarcely notice if I slipped away. I simply told my mother that I was going outside to clear my head before it got too dark. In her dreary state, she just nodded, barely registering what I said. I still felt strange, the blood burning through my veins, as if I were coming down with some sort of rare disease, but I could only attribute it to the stress of the situation. My nerve endings felt frayed, but they would keep me alert. I had to be on my guard when meeting Cain. The patrols and searches for Anne were easier to avoid than I thought. Because it was getting dark, Alpha Brett would not allow smaller search groups to rove the land, so the parties were more spread out. I found an area of the woods where my packmate's scent was fresh, so they would not be searching there again anytime soon. And from there I headed north. I walked in a stream for a brief spell as to mask my scent better. My wolf itched to be free, as she was feeling the same feverish tension I was. But I ignored her. I would meet Cain face to face. The forest grew steadily quieter as I continued, the animals likely scurrying far away from the menace that was lurking nearby. It was fully dark now, the thin moonlight doing little to illuminate the forest floor. Leaves crackled and crunched under my feet as I crossed another stream. I hoped my innate sense of direction was guiding me true. Not too long after dark. The hairs on my neck stood on end, and I knew I was getting close. The forest was deathly still now. The crunching leaves underneath my bare feet seemed disconcertingly loud amidst the silence. I felt a spike of nervousness but attempted to quell it, feeling my rosary warm against my skin and hoping it would be enough to dispel Cain's evil. It was not Cain's scent I caught first, it was Anna's. I emerged into a clearing to see 3 figures standing there, bathed in moonlight. Anne was there, bloody and bruised, silver loosely wrapped around her thin torso as a vampire with scraggly hair stood behind her and held her in place. She was slumped, blonde hair falling forward to obscure her features. My eyes immediately flicked to the vampire I knew must be Cain. He was tall and imposing, his features as Maria described them. His unnatural eyes burned with such maliciousness I almost took a step back. My wolf could recognize the aura of pure evil that he emitted, and I tried not to visibly shudder. A lazy smirk made its way across his features as he took me in. And here I was, thinking you'd be no show. He drawled lacily. "What do you want?" was my short response. "In such a hurry, don't you want to get to know me first?" The smirk grew. "I'll have you know, Skylar, that letter took a while to write." I did not like his arrogance. The way he was treating this all like a game. My name sounded like poison coming from his lips. I heard the vampire holding and snicker cruelly. "Enough playing around," I snapped, trying to be brave despite my inner turmoil. "Why did you want to meet me here?" "Call it scientific curiosity." Eyes glinting, echoing the words from the letter. I stared at him, perplexed, completely unsure where he was going with this. "Tell me, Skylar, how have you been feeling since your father's accident?" I couldn't prevent the snarl that escaped my chest. "Don't you dare talk about him," I snapped furiously. The vampire cocked his head, raising an eyebrow. "You really don't know what I'm talking about, do you?" I only stared at him mutinously, refusing to partake in his game of his. Cain shook his head slowly. "It must be much more deeply buried than I originally thought. I suppose the blood will have to do for now." He almost seemed to be talking to himself. Now I made no attempt to hide my bewilderment. "What are you talking about? What is deeply buried?" Cain made a tear-scaring noise in his throat. Now, don't be hasty. If you don't already know, I'll have to let you figure it out by yourself." Figure what out? I was about at the end of my patience. It didn't escape my notice that Anne had shifted position, whimpering in pain. I didn't even want to know what they had done to her. Cain took a step closer, and I had to fight not to move backward. He closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. "Yes, it definitely is different. There's an edge to it." He opened his eyes and his lips curled in a sneer. "Although other than that, you dogs all have blood that smells the same. Disgusting." I ignored the insult. So he was talking about my blood. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madame Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." My eyebrows furrowed. Did this have anything to do with the odd way I'd been feeling all day? I was hoping that, with your father's predicament, it would have emerged. Seems I'll have to wait. Before I could put all the pieces together, Cain moved on, his eyes taking on a hungry edge as he examined me. "Or I could just take you with me, see if I can beat it out of you." He grinned, and I noticed with a stab of horror that his canines had slightly elongated. I did not prevent the growl from emerging from my chest. "There's no way in hell I'll go with you," I snapped. Cain's eyebrows rose. "You think you know anything about hell?" Dog, he bared his teeth, his voice hardening. "Your whole species is pathetic. You know nothing of suffering." His eyes were darkening and I recognized the demon within, making itself known. My wolf rose within my consciousness at the insult, but I fought her down, seething. "No, you're either one that is pathetic, hiding in the shadows like a coward, refusing to face your enemies head on, killing those that are weaker than you." I indicated, and with a jerk of my head, seeing the furious expression on Cain's face but recklessly continuing anyways. "You're despicable." In a flash, Cain's face morphed until his eyes were completely black, his fangs bared. In a movement so fast I barely saw it, he lunged at me, claws extended. I scarcely had time to leap backwards, although I knew I would be too slow for him. I braced myself for the impact, but it never came. There was a furious hiss as Cain stopped himself mid, lunge and recoiled, face contorted in pain. He landed on all fours and then quickly scurried backwards like an animal. It was then that I realized his demon eyes were fixated on the necklace hidden under my shirt. There was a burning fury etched in his expression. I drew the cross out, slowly. As soon as it was visible, the second vampire snarled and backed away while Cain continued to glare at the necklace. But he started to say, spitting his words out, "That thing that was supposed to be destroyed." I had never seen so much anger in one expression. Cain's eyes glittered with, and I wondered what experience Hed had with my rosary to infuriate him so. "Well, apparently it worst," I said coolly, still holding it out. The rosary was so hot it was nearly burning my hand. A few seconds passed in which Cain visibly tried to control himself. It was then that I realized he really did have a short temper. Perhaps I could use that to my advantage. He backed away a bit more, keeping a safe distance between himself and the rosary, before his fangs retracted and his eyes returned to their electric green, blue hue. "Well then," he said coldly. Cain's fists were clenched tightly at his sides. "Apparently, there will be a change of plan." I felt a small blossom of relief as he said that. Obviously he hadn't known I had the rosary, and Hed planned to take me with him, likely to use as a bargaining chip against Gabriel. If I hadn't had the rosary, I would have been in trouble. Or I may have never come. No wonder Cain said he thought it'd be a no-show. "You think you'd walk in here unarmed?" I replied, trying to keep my cool left-eyed although I was trembling inside. Cain shrugged, the movement almost delicate. "I was hoping. However, since I can't take you with me, I'm afraid I'll have to do something else drastic." His eyes flicked to the other vampire, who let go of and uncoiled the silver that had been wrapped around her. She crumpled to the ground, landing on her hands and knees, head bowed. In a burst of motion, Cain leapt over to Anne and grabbed her hair, yanking backwards so she was forced to look up. I felt a tremor of fear as I realized what was about to happen now. I yelled furiously, tensing up to leap at him. It was as if everything from then happened in slow motion, although it couldn't have been more than a second. An astonished, despair-filled hazel eyes flicked up to meet mine as I leapt towards Cain on the far side of the clearing. Her gaze caught and held me. In her orbs I saw more emotions than she had ever shown me her entire life: fear, resignation, pain, but most of all, sorrow and regret. In that brief second, Anne displayed more feeling than I had seen in almost 20 years. The intensity of her expression almost took my breath away, as if she was sending me a silent explanation for everything that had ever happened between us instead of begging me for help. Because she knew I was too late. As I was mid-leap, Cain shoved his arm roughly into Alice's chest, the same way he had Riley's, and I heard bones snap as he penetrated her structure. With one jerk he ripped her heart out of her body, and all emotion in her eyes vanished, leaving her expression vacant. With a howl of fury I continued my trajectory, but in the same movement Cain smoothly leapt out of the way, narrowly avoiding my fevered lunge. He could not retaliate because of my rosary, but he hissed menacingly as I landed on all fours and turned to face him. Hovering over Anna's body, he clutched Anna's heart in his hand. Blood smeared on his pale skin. He let go of the organ and it dropped to the ground with a thump. I felt a wave of grief rise within me as I glared at him, my teeth exposed in a snarl, trying not to shift. I was torn between the natural instinct to hover over my dead packmate's body or leap at the attacker. Cain made the decision for me. He smirked menacingly, eyes dark again as the demon inside of him made itself known. "Next time, Skylar, I suggest you let me stick with my original plan." He jerked his head to his companion, the vampire with the dark scraggly hair. The vampire turned and vanished into the trees with scarcely a sound. Cain made to follow before glancing over his shoulder, This little get-together was far too short for my liking. I'll be seeing you soon. Cruelty in his expression. Before he too exited the clearing, I sat over Anna's body until I was sure they were gone before I let my eyes travel downwards to her corpse. Her lips were slightly parted, hazel eyes wide and empty. There were cuts and bruises all over her fair skin and her hair was matted with dirt. Gently, I reached down and brushed a strand of hair out of her face as I felt another wave of uncontrollable grief crash over me. This was Anne, the Alpha's daughter, one of my packmates, and now she was nothing but an empty shell, her wolf gone forever. Her mate was now destined to be alone, and Alpha Brett had lost his only daughter. I stared down at her sadly. Without the arrogance and haughtiness normally present in her expression, she was beautiful, and almost looked gentle. I gently reached forward and closed her eyes. I couldn't stand seeing the profound emptiness that indicated that her soul wasn't there anymore, although her front was splattered with blood and gore. I paid no mind as I lowered my head and rested it against her still, warm figure. Tears blurred my vision and began to trickle unheeded down my cheeks. This was my fault. All my fault. I had provoked Cain somehow, and he had killed Anne, who had never done anything to deserve a death like this. Maybe he had planned on killing her no matter what I did. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. According to Maria, he had called her collateral damage. The guilt was almost unmanageable. I stayed like that for nearly half an hour, lost in my emotion, cradling Anne's still figure in my arms, before I realized I would have to tell the rest of the pack that she was dead. Dead because of me. Letting all of my emotions well forth and my wolf come to the forefront of my consciousness, I tilted my head up and let my grief emerge in a long, drawn-out howl. The rest of the night was heartbreaking, big silent. Alpha Brett had taken one look at Anna's body before all emotion was wiped clean from his face. He had carried her body to his house and had not emerged since. At others' urging, I had returned home to change clothes and shower, although I scarcely remembered doing so. I was standing outside the infirmary now, staring into the distance as sunrise approached. I felt like my life was in shambles. I needed Gabriel. My packmates were looking at me with emotions ranging from pity to fury. I knew some of them blamed me, but I didn't care. I blamed myself too. Although the more I thought about it, the more I was convinced that Cain would have killed her either way. Jack came by at one point and got the entire story from me, and I told him everything from the letter to the events in the clearing. A grief-stricken Maria had wandered over eventually. Looking lost, I had pulled her to me and refused to let her go, and we cried together as the first rays of the sun began to light up the sky. I couldn't imagine what she was going through. She was a lot closer to him than I was. Some time later, I noticed a commotion nearby. A large group was approaching the infirmary, and I heard angry shouting. Alpha Brett was at the forefront of the group, Jack beside him, appearing as if he was trying to reason with him. I caught the end of his words as they approached. "Brett, think about what you're doing, you." "Shut up," Alpha Brett snapped. Maria and I stood up, concerned. I had never heard Alpha Brett speak to his beta like that. Alpha practically sprinting towards us, and I felt a spike of nervousness as I saw what his eyes were fixated on me. We walked out to meet them halfway. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. "What's going on?" Maria asked, sorrow laced in her tone. I opened my mouth to say something, but I never got the chance. Alpha Brett lunged at me in a blur of motion, striking me on the side of the face with his fist. I was thrown backwards like a ragdoll, and I collided with the ground about 10 feet away. Wincing at the explosion of pain in my cheek, I attempted to roll to absorb the main impact, throwing up dust all around me. I struggled to my feet, clutching my cheek as the pain spread. "What the hell? Brett, are you crazy?" Jack snapped, looking at me with a horrified expression. My eyes met Alpha Brett's, and I was frightened at what I saw there. Raw, burning fury, mixed with pain that ran deeper than I could ever imagine. "You," he spit out. Ignoring his beta completely, I stared at him, opening and closing my mouth. What was I supposed to say? This is all your fault. We were fine until you came back. Brett, it isn't Skylar. It's the vampires. Silence. Stop arguing. The Alpha roared at his beta, putting a command in his tone. Alpha Brett. I trailed off, completely lost. It was my fault. Wasn't it? I couldn't defend myself. What? Skylar, what pathetic excuse do you have now? He was almost sneering cruelly at this point. My daughter is dead. Dead. Because you led those fucking bloodsuckers right to us. And you willingly did what they told you to do in that stupid letter. They were going to kill her if I didn't, yeah. Well, she's dead now. And his voice nearly broke. The pain on Alpha Brett's face was palpable. I couldn't imagine what he was going through. What my father would do if he were in Alpha Brett's situation. Sorry does not fucking cut it. You're going to tell me everything, Skylar. Or I will exile you, right here and now. The werewolves around us gasped. I could sense more and more of them approaching to see what was going on. I looked down at the ground, trying to fight my rising emotion. What could I tell him? I couldn't tell him that Gabriel was part angel. He probably wouldn't believe me anyways. And I had promised Raziel. But I couldn't lie to my pack after everything that had just happened. Why are the vampires here? What do they want? Tell me the truth. Using the command, they want Gabriel's blood. I blurt out, unable to fight the command. I frantically thought for words to say that wouldn't reveal my mate's heritage. They need his blood to become invincible. And they were going after his mother, but she got away from them. So now Cain has a personal vendetta against Gabriel. All of that was true. Hopefully it was enough. So you're telling me that my daughter, because the vampires are going after your mate? Our worst enemy. He accented the words with hand gestures, his face a mask of fury. I tried not to cower under his wrath. Yes, I whispered, unable to lie to him. Has he known about this? That they need an Alpha's blood? He was shaking, yes. A furious snarl escaped from Alpha Brett's chest. His eyes were pitch black now, and I knew he was fighting the shift all of the grief and stress made him. Like any Alpha. I'll fucking kill him. Shaking, I blinked at him, horrified, hoping I heard wrong. No, you can't. Yes, I damn well can. Because of that bastard. Our pack is getting attacked. My own daughter was killed and your father is in a coma. Spittle was flying out of his mouth. He looked insane. I have dealt with his cruelty, his pack's oppression, for years and years now without fighting. I have hated every second of it, but I've done it. But I'm not going to anymore. My little girl is dead because of him. Because of your fucking. The grief had caused him to snap, to lose all sense of reason. Jack looked like he was mentally pleading with him, but due to the command, he couldn't argue. If you challenge him, I'll kill you. I pled desperately, ignoring the fact that several of the wolves around us were agreeing with Alpha Brett's words. It was that I didn't want to protect my mate. The fact was, he was stronger than Alpha Brett, and I knew it. If an Alpha trespassed on Gabriel's territory, he would kill without a second thought. It was allowed under werewolf law, and Gabriel was proud and ruthless. Not if I kill him first. I suggest you shut your mouth, Skylar. You've caused enough damage. He shot me a lot, filled with so much hatred I winced and backed away. Jack, stay here. You three. Using his command, Alpha Brett indicated the three wolves nearest him. Without another word, they turned and began to leave. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nelben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Jack and I standing there in horror. Alpha Brett was using his anger as fuel, thinking he was invincible, grieving so badly that he did not care about the consequences, which I knew would be severe. As the group began to head off, I heard Alpha Brett give a furious howl, along with the words, "We are going to challenge this bastard and get him out of this territory once and for all." Chapter 21. I stood there in shock for several long, drawn-out seconds, trying to absorb exactly what was happening. With everything that had occurred in the last few days, my mind was overwhelmed. and the cowardly part of me just wanted to shut everything down, return to my house, and sleep. But I couldn't. My wolf jerked me out of my moment of self-pity when she snarled, loud and clear, in the back of my mind. Our mate. Go to our mate. Maria had made her way over to me and was staring at the swelling lump on my face with an expression akin to horror. Skylar, I can't believe he hit you, she turned to her father. What are we going to do? I didn't hear what Jack said as I felt the blood rushing through my veins and my head started pounding. My wolf wanted to take over so we could shift and run towards the Black Mountains packed territory as fast as we possibly could. I fought her down, gritting my teeth at the effort it took to control her. We have to go there now, she snapped furiously. Are just going to kill Gabriel? I sensed the worry and concern in her voice, and shaking my numbness off, I snapped into action. I shoved through the crowd of werewolves still gathered nearby, ignoring whatever Beta Jack was saying. Maybe Alpha Brett was going to his house first, and I could catch him there before he took off. Some part of me, to my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Seriously doubted that. I had seen the madness glinting in his eyes. He had suffered an overwhelming loss and he was responding with anger. I understood, but that didn't mean I was going to let him start war between our packs. I took off at a quick pace towards the Alpha's house, knowing I couldn't afford to waste time. I heard footsteps behind me as Jack and Maria jogged after me. Are you going to save Gabriel? Maria asked, and I turned over my shoulder as I continued my pace. Her expression was unreadable. While I felt a twinge as I heard Gabriel's name, and I resented the fact that my own Alpha was going after my mate, I realized it wasn't Gabriel's safety I was worried about. I knew how powerful and relentless he was. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilbe, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. No one going to try to save Alpha Brett. Jack caught up to me, eyebrows drawn together in confusion. Skylar, I know your mate is strong, but Alpha Brett's rage is fueling him. Right now he feels like he has nothing left to lose. He might. Trust me, guys. I broke in, cutting the bait off bluntly. Gabriel is too strong. Alpha Brett won't stand a chance. As I spoke the words, I knew they were true. Gabriel would kill Alpha Brett without thinking. And while I thought Brett was making some very rash decisions, I didn't want him dead. It would only throw our pack into more chaos. The packs needed to work together until the vampires were gone, not to tear each other apart. We reached the Alpha's house. To my disappointment, I didn't catch Brett's fresh scent there, so he had decided to go straight to enemy territory. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I had to go now or I wouldn't catch up to them in time. I have to go after him. I turned to face Jack as if I were pleading for permission, but I didn't plan on letting anyone stop me. Not this time. I know you may not believe me, but Alpha Brett is in over his head, and we can't afford confrontation with werewolves while we have worse enemies around. My eyes fell on Maria as I silently pleaded with her. Jack ran a hand through his short hair in agitation. Skylar, I just don't think it's. I have to go. I responded desperately, shifting from foot to foot in anticipation. I couldn't waste any more time. My wolf still wanted to claw her way out. You honestly think I don't know I'll be putting myself in a dangerous situation? My father's in a coma, for crying out loud, and I'm leaving him for this. We can't afford a war on our hands, and Alpha Brett is too blind to see that. I began to back away after Jack didn't respond. Maria stepped forward. Skylar, I could go with you. You don't have to go alone now. This is my fault. I can't put anyone else in danger. Jack cut in. Your parents. My mother will keep in contact with me. Just tell her I have to do this. I won't be in danger from the Black Mountains pack. They won't hurt me. My wolf whined urgently, forcing me onwards. I turned away from Maria and Jack and began to jog towards the trees in preparation to shift. The conviction and conviction at my voice definitely assured Maria, but I caught a dubious look on Jack's face as I turned away. I didn't care. I'd only myself to blame for this mess, and I sure as hell was going to solve it. I just didn't know how yet. "Stay alert, Skylar," Duck shouted after me, and I was relieved he wasn't arguing anymore. Probably because he knew I was right, it was all my fault. I shifted as quickly as possible after tying my clothes to my ankle. I had still been feverish and twitchy, although less so after Anna's death, but the sensations thankfully subsided to a bearable level after I changed into my wolf. I did not want to deal with all of that right now. My wolf yipped in agitation, and we took off in the general direction of the Black Mountain Pack's territory. I felt a stab of guilt for not explaining everything to my mother, but surely she'd understand. I knew I was disregarding my own safety and my respect for Alphabet, but if I could help my pack, I would. It felt good to stretch my muscles again, but as I dodged thick tree trunks and leapt over fallen logs, I could feel the exhaustion that had come on from the lack of sleep. If I were human, I wouldn't have been able to stay awake for so long. I could only hope I would have enough energy to get there. A couple minutes into my run, I sensed another presence, fast approaching me, a grey blur through the vivid green of the forest. I skidded to a halt, my giant paws scrabbling on the ground, so the gigantic wolf narrowly avoided me. He whizzed within inches of me, the distilled air from his barreling runt stirring my fur. He came to a stuttering halt and spun to face me, snarling. I recognized the wolf as Mikey, a decent warrior that was a large size, but slower than I. My fur bristled as I returned his growl, glaring at him. "What the hell are you doing?" I snapped through the mind blink. "Alphabet told me that Cal didn't let you follow them," he replied in his deep, guttural voice. I growled louder, the sound reverberating from deep within my chest. "In trying to help Alphabet, Achia's going to get himself killed," he commanded me, "and I obey my Alpha's orders," he replied coolly, although I saw wariness presiding deep in his yellow eyes. Mikey didn't want to attack me, but he had no choice if I tried to follow the Alpha. I mentally cursed as my wolf continued to growl at his. I could not afford to waste this precious time. I glanced around quickly. I didn't want to fight my own packmate. Could I escape? Don't even try it. Without another word, Mikey rushed at me, tensing before bringing his gigantic body into a powerful leap. I quickly rolled out of the way, growling in frustration. He lunged at me again, but I neatly dodged, taking a lunging snap at his haunch but narrowly missing as he twisted around. I decided to use my agility as an advantage to Mickey's left side. He turned to face me, and I spun quickly to the other side, taking another snap and getting a mouthful of fur. This was a waste of time. Worse, if I received an injury, there was no chance I could make it. I had to outrun Mikey before it was too late. We circled each other for a brief moment, both growling deep within our chests. Mikey lunged yet again, but I sidestepped and an idea came to me. Why not use his momentum against him? Without further ado, I took off in the same direction as before, hearing him quickly take up pursuit. His paws thundered against the ground as he followed hot on my heels, and I slowed my pace so he would begin to catch up. I had to trick him into thinking he would catch me, so I maintained the slower pace, hearing his steps increase in frequency as he sped up. Within seconds I felt warm breath on my back legs and heard his deep pounce immediately behind me. I had to give him credit. For his size, Mikey was almost impossibly fast, which was likely why Alphabet thought he'd be able to detain me. He was wrong. I trained my ears on Mikey's movements, speeding up ever so slightly so he wouldn't realize I was deliberately slowing down. I knew he would lunge soon and try to pin me to the ground with his massive stature. Sure enough, near heartbeats later I heard a break in his thundering steps as he tensed and then lunged. I felt the air stir above me and, in the last possible second, I abruptly stopped and rolled to the side in one swift movement. I returned to my feet as Mikey landed heavily and stumbled. That was my chance, as he teetered to one side, putting all of the weight onto feet while he tried to regain his balance. I lunged and ensnared his front leg in my jaws. I bit down, feeling a surge of guilt as the bone crunched under my powerful jaws. I released his leg before he could counterattack, hearing his furious snarl. And again I took off, not giving him even a single second to recover. I knew it was a low blow, crushing his leg like that and running, and not a tactic I would have used in any sort of training maneuver, but I had no choice. He couldn't follow me, but still, I could not help the prevalent sense of guilt I felt as I heard his pained, furious howl erupt far behind me. I ran after Alpha Brett and the wolves he was bringing with him, following their scent as soon as I came to it. I knew I was half an hour behind, and I was a lot slower than Alpha Brett to begin with. But I hoped since he was bringing a few others with him he would be forced to slow his pace. Birds erupted from the trees and animals scurried out of my way as my paws thudded on the ground and I continued my breakneck pace. I had to stop Alpha Brett before he could make such a stupid decision. I knew he was stressed, and I knew he was in incredible pain. I couldn't imagine losing a family member. He had likely retreated to the back of his consciousness while his wolf took over, driving him to go kill who he perceived as the enemy. But even though part of me understood him, I couldn't let him do this. I had stood by for far too long, and deserved a funeral. Like every werewolf had, she deserved to be recognized, despite the differences it had with her before. Normally the family would be preparing the funeral now. Alpha Brett would regret this later, I knew, if he was dead. And if he died, his pure mate and young son would never recover, and his brother would be Alpha in several years once he came of age. He needed his father to watch over him and guide him. Underneath everything, I couldn't lie to myself. While I was going to help Alpha Brett and my pack, a very large part of me wanted to see Gabriel again. I missed him desperately, and with everything going on I hadn't been able to sort everything through yet. I knew he'd be upset to see me when I hadn't made my choice. But despite all of that, I couldn't deny the fact that I wanted to see him with my own eyes and make sure everything was okay. Had anyone else in his pack been hurt? Had Raziel found what he was looking for? My wolf longed for him with a feverish desperation, and I couldn't deny the jolt I felt every time I pictured his dark eyes and the way GD looked at me when we last parted. I could only hope I was not too late, and that Alpha Brett had not caused irreparable damage to both of our packs. L is POV. There are intruders from the Silverwoods pack on our territory, I told Gabriel, bracing myself for how he would respond. I was panting, having been running border patrol all day, but as soon as Wade caught the scent I knew I had to tell him. For a second I thought I sensed a glimmer of emotion coming through our mind. Link and I instantly knew why. Skylar. For a brief instant Gabriel had probably hoped it was Skylar coming back. Before he realized I would have called her out by name. Who he demanded coolly. All vestiges of emotion vanished. He had a prominent distaste for her pack as a whole. I knew, and it would be worse when he found out exactly who had come to visit. There's no mistaking it. The scent is very faint, so they must have just crossed our border, but it's distinctive. It's got to be their Alpha. There are 3 others with him. Their Alpha is trespassing on our territory. Gabriel snapped and I winced, detecting the simmering anger there. If an Alpha from an enemy pack was crossing without permission, that could only mean one thing. Yes, Alpha. There was a snarl in his voice as he spoke again. They'll be right there. Rendezvous with me at the fringe of the forest. By the time we met up with Gabriel, I knew that the intruders would be quite far into our territory. The thought made me uneasy. Something must have happened to set the other Alpha off. He had never dared infringe upon our territory before. We ran as fast as we could, all in wolf form, as the overpowering scent continued to waft towards us on the breeze, judging the trajectory. We made a rough estimate of where we would intercept them and continued in that direction. Running along next to the Alpha, I couldn't help but feel concerned. Surely it wouldn't have anything to do with Skylar, would it? His wolf would know if something happened to their mate. My own wolf said calmly, as usual, to my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I felt his pang of sadness as he spoke of mates. We had yet to find ours, and we were long past 18. Although younger than Gabriel, I hadn't found Skylar until he was 25. I hope so, was all I responded. At this distance Gabriel could only feel Skylar's pain if it was severe. Like when the vampires bit her. He hadn't really felt anything, so she had to be okay. I tried to assure myself. We continued on and the scent steadily intensified. I could see Gabriel's fur standing up, and I knew it must have infuriated him that someone dared trespass. He was a very proud and unforgiving alpha. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. The other alpha didn't stand a chance. Soon enough we had emerged onto open land, the trees' shade neglecting us to be replaced by rocky hills and scraggly grass. We stopped just out onto the open land, the trees still circling behind us and to our immediate left, while the rocky plains stretched out ahead and disappeared into a fringe of forest in the far distance. Gabriel told us to shift back into human form and get dressed while we awaited the intruders. We weren't exactly sure of the other alphas' intention, but it was customary for alphas to address each other in their human bodies unless they decided to fight. It didn't take long for Skyle Ozpack members to arrive. They burst out of the forest far ahead of us, already having shifted back into humans. They approached at a rapid pace while we waited, tensed in defensive stances, although it was not werewolf custom to attack another pack without exchanging words first. The alpha, Brett as I thought it heard him called in meetings previously, was at the forefront. 3 other werewolves were spread behind him, all muscular and imposing. We had the same numbers. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I would normally have stayed behind to watch the pack, but since it'd already been out on patrol and copper scent, Gabriel had allowed me to tag along. Vincent was normally present at Gabriel's side, but he was overseeing the pack for the brief time we were gone. Not that it mattered, the intruders were so far onto our land by now that we weren't a terribly far distance away from the pack village. As they grew closer, the look on the Alpha Brett's face was unmistakable, pure, unfiltered rage and loathing. Something must have happened to set him off. His eyes burned with such ferocity that I hided Gabriel would get out of here without a fight. Not that he wanted to. If Alpha Brett trespassed on his territory and challenged Gabriel, the two would battle. Whichever wolf won would be within their rights to kill the other. It was the nature of alphas to be harsh and unforgiving. The custom was one of our more primitive ones. But we had animals inside of us, wolves that refused to bow to human morals. Killing was natural among alphas. Survival of the fittest. As they said, the group of intruders finally stopped, several yards away from us, staring us down angrily. Alpha Brett angriest of all. He was trembling and I was surprised he was even controlling himself. He had the look of a madman. "Why are you here?" Gabriel asked, a growling undertone in his deep voice. "You," the other alpha snarled, balling his hands into fists. The veins stood out along his arms. Those fucking monsters are here because of you." For a split second Gabriel looked taken aback, and I saw a flicker of betrayal cross his features. So Skylar had told her pack then. I wondered if she had had a choice. She didn't seem the type to just blurt out secrets like that. In the Black Mountains pack, I was the only one who knew everything about Gabriel's history. I had been commanded to never tell anyone about his heritage. I'd been glad when Gabriel told me HED finally confessed everything to his mate. "That doesn't give you any right to trespass," was Gabriel's cool response. Although I could see anger rising in his dark eyes. "I have every right. I should have done this a long time ago. You've abused your power far too much," came the Alpha Brett's snarling reply. "I should kill you for your disrespect." Gabriel snapped. His wolf was likely not taking kindly to the power struggle. "I'd like to see you try. My daughter is dead. You soulless bastard. Dead because of you and Skylar." I blinked in shock at the revelation. The wolves behind Alpha Brett shifted, looking pained as the topic was brought up. Gabriel tensed up, looking murderous. "Leave Skylar out of this," he growled dangerously. If he was surprised to hear the Alpha's daughter was dead, he didn't show it. Knowing him, he didn't care. Alpha Brett laughed. the sound coming out distorted and cruel. Too late. If she was such a spineless liar, none of this would ever happened. A furious snarl erupted from Gabriel's chest. His fury was so palpable that my wolf Winston shied away from his alpha power. I saw the other two werewolves in our pack flinch as their wolves did the same. I noticed uncertainty on the faces of Alpha Brett's warriors. I swear if you fucking touch her, she's in my pack. I will punish her how I see fit. She's practically a traitor anyways, thinking that you're worthy of any sort of forgiveness. She deserves to be exiled. Alpha Brett said. Gabriel leapt forward in a blur of motion, coming to stop directly in front of Alpha Brett. The two alphas radiated power, standing mere feet apart. Gabriel a couple inches taller. I, knowing Gabriel's full heritage, could see that Alpha Brett had no chance despite his fury. And you deserve to have your throat ripped out. I will tell you one last time, leave her out. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. You will not harm a hair on her head. Gabriel leaned closer. He spoke, growling. There was a command in Gabriel's tone as he spoke the last words, and I saw Alpha Brett take a step back, gritting his teeth as his wolf bowed to Gabriel's command. I knew that because of Gabriel's blood, he could command other alphas, but it was still disconcerting to watch as Alpha Brett's veins stood out, his face turning red as he vainly fought the order and failed. This is the last time I will ask you, why are you here? Despite Gabriel's obvious anger, he had to obey the formalities. If Alpha Brett was challenging him, it was customary to say it outright. At this point I didn't think the intruding alpha gave a damn about tradition, but Gabriel would follow it to retain the respect from us. Alpha Brett stood upright, baring his teeth as he spoke the words and confirmed our suspicions. I, Alpha Brett, the alpha of the Silver Woods pack, challenge you and all of your rights as alpha of the Black Mountains pack herein. The words normally ended there, or at least I thought they did, as I'd never seen anyone challenge Gabriel before. Brett, however, recklessly continued, I think you are weak and pathetic, hiding behind your commands in your brain. Wush pack. Your actions against my pack are despicable and you don't deserve to live. You. But Alpha Brett never got to finish. In a movement quicker than lightning that even Alpha Brett couldn't prevent, Gabriel struck him with a powerful punch that sent him flying, rolling into the dust. Alpha Brett turned over, snarling, and then began to shift, close ripping. Gabriel had time to quickly strip his clothes off before he transformed into the midnight black wolf he was notorious for. The two wolves circled each other, teeth bared and haunches high. Gabriel was bigger than Alpha Brett's grey wolf, although not by much. The sheer force of their alpha dominance was overwhelming, and the rest of us backed away, our wolves intimidated. We were mostly there as witnesses or back up if the other pack broke customs and attacked. While it was supposed to be a one-on-one fight, by the looks of the Silverwoods pack warriors, they had no intention of attacking Gabriel. Menacing growls erupted from the alphas' throats. With a snarl, Brett leapt at Gabriel, but Gabriel dodged easily and came to circle around him. Alpha Brett, in his furious anger, attacked again. Gabriel continued to dodge and the dance continued, Brett never landing a single blow. Brett moved very fast, fast enough that I wouldn't have been able to keep up with him. That being said, he was enough to take on Gabriel. Even I could see that Gabriel was toying with him, tiring him out. Gabriel knew he was the stronger fighter, but he wanted to humiliate the alpha that had trespassed on Black Mountain's pack territory. And it was even worse because Brett had insulted Skylar. After Brett lunged, quicker than lightning, Gabriel twisted around and sidestepped, sinking his teeth into Brett's haunch as he did so. The grey wolf howled in pain and backed away, snarling. It got considerably more violent from there as the two wolves lunged simultaneously, connecting with a mighty roar. The two began to rapidly exchange blows almost faster than the eye could see. From what I could tell, to my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Gabriel was easily overpowering Brett in every exchange. The grey wolf howled in pain as a gash was opened on his thigh, followed by one on his upper back. Gabriel's face was a mask of snarling fury and sharp teeth as he continued to let into the other alpha. Judging by the cries of pain increasing in frequency, he was holding nothing back. Watching them, I knew just what was going to happen. Skylar's alpha was a goner. Skylar's POV was exhausted. Luckily, my wolf had incredible strength, because my human form would have passed out long ago. I had run all through the afternoon only stopping for water. No food, because I just didn't have the time. There were leaves and twigs stuck to my light silver fur and my paws were caked with mud, but I paid no regard. I had to hold on to the hope that I could stop Gabriel from killing Alpha Brett. I knew there was a very slim chance, because when one alpha challenged another, it was usually a fight to the death. Alphas were proud and did not forgive. It was their animalistic nature to kill their rivals. And Gabriel was considered one of the cruelest of all. Half an hour ago the scent had gotten increasingly fresher and I knew I was getting close. I had long since passed into Gabriel's territory, but no wolf had come to stop me yet. Perhaps they were all focused on the more prominent trespassers. Or maybe they recognized my scent. Either way, I was nearing the edge of the forest, and I couldn't help the sense of preoccupation that struck me. This preoccupation worsened when I felt a sharp pain in my shoulder that washed mine, indicating that Gabriel must have been bitten. I winced, briefly breaking stride as the simmering pain slowly faded, only to be replaced by another in my hind leg. Was I too late? I had run recklessly all day and I thought I had gained some ground on them. But I would have noticed the broken mind link if Brett were dead, and the pain I felt from Gabriel only indicated minor wounds. I probably only felt it because I was getting, quoting my frustration. I pushed my paws to go faster. My wolf, excited at seeing her mate and wanting to protect her alpha if she could, complied. My muscles burned, but I streaked through the forest at a breakneck pace. Only when I heard the sounds of snarling fighting did I alter direction, deciding to follow the line of trees until I was as closeable to the battle. I could use the element of surprise to my advantage. Perhaps startle Gabriel enough that I could buy some time. While my lack of faith in my own alpha would be disconcerting to some, I somehow just knew that Brett would lose. He had no chance. And then I saw them through a break in the trees. What I observed made my blood run cold and my heart almost stop. But I could not be surprised, because it was exactly what I expected. Alpha Brett, in wolf form, was on the rocky ground, battered and broken, blood oozing out of numerous open wounds. It looked like several of his bones were shattered. Gabriel stood over him, fur standing on end, snarling. Gabriel's injuries were barely visible. As I watched, sprinting through the forest parallel to the group, my mate jerked his head and sunk his teeth into Alpha Brett's side, ripping his skin open. Then he withdrew, only to leap to Brett's other side and do the same thing. Alpha Brett was too weak to retaliate, only able to cry out in pain as the beating continued. Gabriel, my mate, was basically torturing and humiliating my alpha, and it honestly scared me. I had never seen such a dark side to him in person, and I recoiled from his brutality as he closed his jaws in on Brett's hind leg, crushing it. My wolf whimpered, not liking the sight of our mate in his cruelest form. I was near the edge of the trees now, immediately beside the group of werewolves. I felt fear strike my heart as I realized what I was about to do. What I had to do. Gabriel was circling Alpha Brett slowly. His stance was menacing. My heart was struck with fear as I realized that Gabriel was going to do it now. He was going to kill my alpha. I couldn't let that happen. It would tear our packs up beyond hope. And I realized that was what Cain wanted. He didn't need his enemies uniting. Hell, he had probably killed Anne predicting something like this would happen. So, for the first time in a very long time, I acted without thinking it through. I exploded from the trees a few yards from the group. Gabriel was still circling near Brett, letting him suffer, but prepared to deliver the killing blow. I did the unthinkable. I tensed my body and leapt, putting every ounce of strength into my lunge, sailing over the heads of the nearest wolves as they turned to gape at me. Gabriel, intent on killing his foe, noticed my presence at the last instant. I saw a glint of his eyes, cold and unforgiving, flash to me. He was in the middle of the battle, about to kill his rival, and I recognized nothing of him in his wolf's orbs. He was lost in his animalistic nature. I knew what I was doing had probably never been done. It was unthinkable to interrupt an alpha's fight if I did so. The alpha had every right to kill me too. But it was what I had to risk. I had to hope he realized who I was before he let his wolf annihilate me for interrupting the battle. I landed somewhat unsteadily near the two and I quickly sidled forward, placing myself in the small space between Alpha Brett's prone figure and my mate. Gabriel snarled furiously at being interrupted in the middle of his kill. I looked up, trying not to cower as I made eye contact with Gabriel, who was approaching me slowly and menacingly. He doesn't know us. He doesn't recognize us. I whimpered internally. His wolf has taken over. We interrupted an alpha's fight. What were we thinking? He has to know us. My wolf responded, although she seemed unsure. It was much easier for an alpha to lose himself in his wolf than it would be for... Perhaps his angelic side would actually come in handy here. All eyes, except Alpha Brett's, were fixated on the two of us. I crouched low, acting submissive, praying my mate would come to his senses. It would be much easier if we had already mated, but as it was, the bond was still tenuous. All I knew was I had to keep my figure in front of Alpha Brett, whose breathing was labored and unsteady. Gabriel halted suddenly, his growls ceasing. He appeared to be having an internal battle. I saw confusion flicker across his eyes along with inner turmoil. After a few tension-filled seconds, I saw what I had been looking for most, recognition, which was quickly followed by incredulity. My mate straightened and continued to walk towards me, even more slowly this time, until his snout was less than a foot from mine. My wolf wanted to curl up against him, seek comfort from his black fur, but I held her back. The pull was still very strong, but I could manage. I was sure what was going through Gabriel's head right now. His eyes as a wolf were much more expressive than when he was human, but I couldn't be sure. Gabriel whined, very softly, and I winced at the pain apparent in his expression. He had wanted me to come back, but clearly realized I had done so only for my alpha. His eyes flickered to Brett as if remembering he was there, and then back to me. He seemed to be struggling with himself as if he didn't know whether to follow the wolf's instinct or listen to me. I knew I had put myself in an incredibly dangerous position. I was just hoping that Gabriel cared about me enough to at least think this through. Gabriel growled yet again, frustrated and torn. He lowered his head, muscles bunching and claws digging into the ground. The impulse to kill was definitely strong. Skylar, what the hell are you doing? You can't interrupt an alpha's battle. That was Eli. He had stepped forth, an angry look creasing his brows. I whined softly and Gabriel growled, glaring at his beta and clearly not liking the way Eli was talking to me. Then, to my shock, Gabriel started to shift back into human form. I tried not to stare, averting my gaze as his fur and claws receded, and he stood there as a naked human man. Thankfully his clothes were close by and he quickly to shorts before I lost all sense of self-control and openly ogled him. My wolf was purring in appreciation. Stop. We've more important things to worry about right now. I snapped at her. As a human, I could more clearly see the deep gashes on Gabriel's shoulder and leg. They were worse than I'd realized. I whined softly. My wolf worried, but Gabriel ignored me. Move out of the way. Skylar, Gabriel said impatiently. His eyes were emotional as again. I crouched lower, not wanting to move. Dimly I noticed that behind me, Alpha Brett had shifted back into his human form, naked and bleeding. This meant he and his wolf were both unconscious. Damn it, Skylar. If you don't move, I might lose it again. Wincing at his tone, I slowly stepped away. I could feel my 3 pack mates staring at me intently, but I ignored them. Gabriel huffed and ran a hand through his hair. He trespassed on my territory, insulted me and challenged me. I have the right to kill him, even now, in fighting my wolf. HES arrival Alpha. Skylar. I wind again. Couldn't he see what was happening here? I had to speak to him in person. I indicated the woods with a jerk of my head, running into the tree shelter and shifting back in record time before putting my clothes back on. I knew Gabriel wouldn't want his packmate seeing my unclothed form. Upon returning, I tried not to stare at Gabriel's lack of upper body clothing. I berated myself for being so easily distracted at a time like this. Alpha Brett was not moving, but blood was still oozing out of his cuts. Beaten to a pulp, he didn't look nearly as intimidating. Gabriel, I started, not missing the way he tensed when I said his name. He stared at me intently. I hoped the bruise from Alpha Brett's punch had faded over the last couple hours. I didn't want him any more pissed off. What happened to your face? Apparently it hadn't faded altogether. Nothing. Just a minor battle wound while trying to get here. It wasn't entirely a lie, and Gabriel would kill Brett if he found out the truth. Gabriel narrowed his eyes, but I quickly changed the subject. The Alpha's grieving. And just died. I swallowed the lump in my throat. This is what Cain wants. He was originally targeting Anne, but he saw the opportunity and seized it. He wants to create a rift between our packs. You're playing into his hands. Gabriel stiffened. You met Cain? Yes, his jaw clenched. Knowing Gabriel, he was thinking about how it was his fault. How he shouldn't have let me go. Did he say anything else? He was mainly just taunting me. He attacked my father, though. I neglected to mention the coma part. Gabriel looked down then, but not before I caught the guilt in his expression. It's not your fault, I said softly. Judging by his posture, I had correctly guessed his train of thought. Look, it doesn't matter. I continued before he could argue. Please just don't kill Alpha Brett. His family has suffered enough. And my pack mates, I don't want them hating your pack when the vampires are the real enemy here. He isn't fit to be Alpha. Skylar. HES as good as dead. I knew he was right. Alpha Brett couldn't lead us in a time like this. But still, his recklessness will get you all killed. I didn't see how I could get out of this. But I tried anyways. Please, Gabriel. I'm begging you. My pack is begging you. I felt pathetic, groveling in front of my own mate. But what else could I do? I'm not doing it for your pack. I felt my stomach drop. But there was a strange expression in Gabriel's eyes. As if he was pondering something. He glanced at Eli, and the two seemed to have a silent conversation. I tried to wait patiently as they spoke, but I couldn't help but shift position every 2 seconds. What could they possibly be discussing right now? My pack members looked equally confused. The three of them watching Gabriel and Eli with blank faces. I got the impression that some sort of big decision was being made. Another minute passed before Gabriel finally sighed. Long and drawn out. It was going to happen eventually, for one reason or another. Eli mused aloud. I blinked, completely bewildered. Gabriel nodded once, and his dark eyes found mine. I felt my heart rate increase just at the eye contact with him. I'm doing this for you. Skylar, don't forget that. His voice was quieter, tone serious. I suddenly found it hard to breathe. Gabriel slowly walked until he stood directly over Alpha Brett's naked body. Eli and another wolf, on silent command, came over and heaved up his unconscious body, each one with an arm around Brett's waist. His head lolled and eyelids flickered. Wake up, Gabriel snapped. Brett didn't respond. Gabriel said it again, louder, and this time there must have been some sort of command in his tone because Alpha Brett's eyes slowly opened and flicked around lethargic ally. His face was mottled with bruises and swelling, but I was more concerned about the way some of his bones were knotted. He must have been in an abominable amount of pain, but he said nothing as Gabriel stared him down. You don't deserve to carry on living, in my opinion, but someone in your pack thinks otherwise. Gabriel indicated me with a jerk of his head. So, I'm giving you a choice. I can kill you, or I can purge you. I stared, completely lost. I had never heard of a purge and I had no clue what it meant. Alpha Brett obviously did. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel, heartfelt thanks for your unfading Clichut's enthusiasm. For I could see a look of horror and regret pass through his eyes. You can't, yes. You challenged me, and you lost. And the penalty is death. But this is your one chance to avoid that. I won't ask again. Alpha Brett began to struggle and thrash, but to no avail. A pained grimace appeared on his face as he stared at Gabriel mutinous lie. I didn't know what a purge was, but it looked Gabriel was quickly losing his patience. Alpha Brett, I said quietly. His bleary eyes turned on me. You can't die. You have a mate and a son back home. I know you miss Anne, but the rest of your family needs you. They miss you, and how could they go on without you? My Alpha glared at me but did not speak. Please, Alpha Brett. I know you're feeling a lot of rage right now, but think of them waiting for you to come home. Your son will need your guidance. Your mate can't do it all without your help. I don't know what the purge is, but anything is better than leaving them forever. There was several seconds of tense, drawn-out silence. Before Alpha Brett finally bowed his head, it seemed like all of the fight left him as his shoulders sagged and his body drooped even further. I tried not to stare at the festering wounds and broken bones. Now are you going to do this willingly? You know the purge won't work if you don't do it willingly. And if it goes wrong, I will kill you. Gabriel growled impatiently. I'm sure you know the words. Alpha Brett grunted. Everything you worked for it'll be gone. You willingly sacrificed it as soon as you crossed into my territory. But he subsided into silence as he seemed to realize there really was not much of a choice here. Death or purge. Brett looked absolutely humiliated, while I could only stare there in bewilderment as he took a deep breath, steeled himself, and began to mumble a fast string of words that I barely caught. I, Alpha Brett, hereby submit to you. I state that I am no longer fit or able to be an alpha, and I am no longer fit or able to lead the Silverwoods pack. I reject my bloodline and hereby terminate my alpha line. I knowingly relinquish and divest all control to you. My mouth dropped open. Wait, so did that mean let this scar be a reminder of what I have forsaken? With those words, Alpha Brett proceeded to elongate his claws and with a jerking motion created a gash right over his heart. The blood welled up and dripped down his exposed torso as Gabriel began to speak. I, Alpha Gabriel, hereby accept your alpha entitlement to the Silverwoods pack. I acknowledge that I have received all of your former responsibilities as alpha, and I will lead the Silverwoods pack as long as I am fit able. I knowingly continue the bloodline that you have relinquished. Let this scar be a reminder of what I have undertaken. With a similar jerking motion, Gabriel created a gash over his heart. I winced as I felt the smarting pain. So this was a purge, where one alpha took on another's responsibilities. Of course it would come down to blood. All werewolf ceremonies came down to blood. Gabriel put a hand over his bloody chest as Brett did the same. Then, in a simultaneous motion, Gabriel lifted his blood-smeared palm and placed it against Brett's. I felt something in the back of my mind snap and break, as if a connection had been severed. It was so sudden and so intense that I staggered backwards, taken off guard, trying not to fall to my knees. I noticed my packmates were having similar reactions. I placed hands to my temple as I felt a pressure, an unfamiliar presence in the back of my mind. I realized with a start that it was Gabriel. I could not reach him, as there was still a barrier between our minds. But somehow I knew he was still there, and Alpha Brett's presence had been erased completely. I stood there, clutching my head as I tried to adjust to the new development. Gabriel turned to face us. He stood straight, his eyes burning with energy, and he absolutely radiated power. I actually felt intimidated by my own mate. The purge will completed tomorrow night at moonrise, and our mental link will be established. His eyes focused on my face, boring into mine with a disconcerting intensity. Welcome to the pack. Although I felt the last word directed only at me, it was then that everything finally clicked and I could only gape at him. My wolf as shocked as I was. Instead of killing Alpha Brett, Gabriel had used the purge to remove him of his responsibilities. As another alpha, Gabriel had the capabilities of absorbing Brett's former responsibilities. which meant Gabriel was my new alpha.